So Chen, we're here for another case study. Really excited for this one, mainly because I'm a firm believer, and so are you, on collaboration and the ability of us to collaborate and support clients across our different expertise and service areas, with the ultimate goal of always trying to encourage better community alignment and better benefit for community. So I definitely think that this is a case study that was able to achieve that. So in this case study, there's a successful entrepreneur, has many businesses across healthcare, construction, as well as professional services. They required, they came to WealthBridge for some comprehensive estate planning services. And like many established business owners, his objectives were pretty clear: protect family wealth, minimize tax exposure, ensure liquidity at death, create clarity for intergenerational transfer, and align assets with long-term legacy goals. So this engagement began as estate planning, but it evolved into something much larger. So maybe if we break it as the phase one of it, which was estate planning, what was the challenges that he had, and what was kind of the solutions that you developed?
Yeah, so estate planning was very much so a technical exercise in nature, and a lot of time it typically involves, the minimizing taxes piece of it, being able to help put in tools that make sure from a legal perspective, things are covered, etc. So really walking through the client, just really doing a full discovery and understanding where they are today and where he wanted to get to, one of which was that legacy planning piece of it, or the charitable giving piece of it. But before we even got to that, the notion of how do we minimize taxes became one of the biggest priority and the objective, obviously, for him. To be able to put together strategies and tools that ultimately accomplish that was sort of that first part of that estate planning exercise, before we sort of got into a lot of the discussion in terms of charitable giving strategies, right? And one of the questions that definitely came in, and when we joke about this sometimes, which is, hey, if you had $1 million today, that you want to give to a charity, what charity would that be for? And funny enough, I don't think I expected a very comprehensive answer from him, but he was very much aligned because he's done a lot of charitable giving exercises in the past. It may not have necessarily it wasn't necessarily structured in the past. It was done through a personal approach sometimes it was done through corporations, but it was never structured. But he always was charitable. He always had an intent in terms of giving, and he wanted to make that family value be a big piece, especially even as his kids were growing. He wanted to make sure they grew up with the notion, the noble intent of giving, and understood the value of giving back. So that became a primary point of discussion when we were at that crux of estate planning versus legacy planning. It became very clear it was no longer going to be a technical exercise. It was, he wanted to be able to structure something that was super, super meaningful.
Good. And then I think that eventually led where we came in, which is a bit of what I would probably describe as phase two. Because he was very clear on what he wanted to do and had the capacity, but was thinking beyond just as being a donor.
Yep.
And wanting to be actively involved in that type of charitable activity. Typically when clients come in that way, we come in with our NPO governance and experience with foundations and private foundations and NPOs in general. And if a client has a charitable giving intent, our go-to, the simplest way is to tell them, why don't you identify a charity that is aligned with you, and why don't you donate to that charity, get the tax credits, help your tax implication. That's kind of usually the standard strategy. But for clients who have a very clear intention of wanting to be actively involved and see that involvement as a plan over the course of many years, then we may offer, well, in this specific circumstance, there are vehicles where you could establish your own private foundation.
Right.
If you want to create a legacy of giving that extends beyond your time and into your children as well, and you want that to be a part of how people see your family, and you have the capacity and means to operate that organization, then we would suggest a private foundation. So I think that's exactly what we were able to do for them. They retained us to support them with really understanding that process, helping to plan out the core documents that will be required, making sure that and ensuring that it was compliant with CRA. They work with our legal team to establish the private foundation. And what that did for them was essentially formalize long-term charitable giving, improve tax efficiency, We supported them in establishing the right type of governance structure for that. That allows for that intergenerational participation that he wanted, and it created institutional continuity for himself. And that incorporation, I think, of that foundation was successfully established probably within, I think, 6 to 7 months of him starting the process with WealthBridge.
Yeah.
And I think that led to then what we probably call phase 3, which is creating that capacity for what he then wanted to do with that foundation. So do you want to maybe speak to how it went from estate planning, creating the vehicle of how he wants to do the giving, and how that then translated into the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we sort of completely wrapped up, or as we sort of wrapped up that estate planning technical piece, we got into the, obviously, the charitable giving piece. And we've actually gone back and forth quite extensively on that piece, right? Because even to, implement a sustainable long-term charitable giving vehicle, there are various vehicles. I know we consider donor advised funds versus private foundations. And of course, through 60C's help, he ended up proceeding with private foundation because there's good and bad, for both. And not really bad, but there are, responsibilities that comes with a private foundation in terms of governance structure, CRA regulations, a lot of that kind of stuff. He obviously had the capacity to be able to do that. And for those who may not have that capacity, yet want to be able to implement something which can hopefully give more of a long-term sustainable structure, definitely a donor advised fund might be a good opportunity for you. So now that we've established the private foundation, and obviously your team was instrumental in being able to implement that, especially from a legal perspective, because a lot of these things, like if you go with the wrong application to CRA when you're preparing these applications, or if the application is too vague, for example, it just prolongs the process of getting the charitable designation status. But that was obviously done in a super efficient manner. And then now the third part for me became, all right, now that we have the foundation, how do we sort of fund that foundation at the end of the day, right? We want to be able to give back, or the client wanted to be able to give back to community through various measures. He has access to, wealth from various capacities, whether it be personal wealth, real estate, business ventures, capital market securities, appreciated securities through different means. So then the third part of it was, okay, now that we have all of these different vehicles, what is the most tax efficient manner to be able to get wealth from the different sources I have to the foundation, whether it be to the foundation or to a partner that he wanted to donate, or to a charity that he wanted to donate it to? What is the most efficient ways to be able to do it? We went through a whole slew of exercises. I mean, the client is an accountant by nature, so he was very technical. He wanted to be able to compare 4 different ways to give. Like, should I donate some of my, because I think a lot of people in general are used to donating cash as sort of the most common or the conventional way of giving. We would argue cash is probably one of the least tax efficient way for you as a donor to give. So we ended up comparing a few different strategies for this client. We ended up saying, okay, what if we were to donate some personal assets in terms of appreciated securities? Then we looked at to say, hey, instead of that, what if we were to donate it through the corporation? What if we were to donate some shares from the corporation directly to the charity itself? We also looked at, maybe instead of that, is there a notion to potentially donate flow-through shares? A very complex structure, but is there an opportunity to do that? So we ended up looking at what would be the most tax advantageous ways to be able to donate from the pool of resources he had, in order to make sure we can actually fund that private foundation and charity, because that'll allow him to be able to execute on what he ultimately wants to do. Our role is facilitate not only how to create the structure in collaboration with 60C, but how do you actually fund that? Once that happens, I think maybe you can now add on, then he had a very meticulous process in how do you take all of this from the private foundation to a charity that I actually care about.
Yeah, and I really love this because it speaks to the concurrent nature of something else that we've been building, which is the legacy planning initiative, where both as individuals but as companies as well have a very strong focus in supporting the anchor charities that really are serving a lot of our underserved communities. And happy that over the last couple of years, several of the major, whether it's healthcare, foundations or autism services or community infrastructure have really found the value in this partnership, and it allows us to really advocate for them, and where possible with the business owners that we meet with, where they may want the tax benefit but they don't have access to know or don't have familiarity with the right charities, it gives us an opportunity to introduce those charities. And this was a great example of someone who had gone through this pathway through estate planning, already had a very strong charitable giving intent, was empowered by the tools that we were able to kind of structure and position them in, which essentially then triggered an internal reflection on them to really want to give a lot more, right? And in this case, they ended up going naturally to the charity that they wanted to. It was coincidentally a charity that was already part of our initiative, and that's really the sweet spot that we try to kind of get to. So, and then, them all also asking us, what do you think, and et cetera, and us without question, vouching for that charity and the foundation, and reinforcing that it's a great idea. And I think that's really the true essence of the collaboration in motion, right? That our intent to really connect business to charity through a mutually beneficial kind of lens of the professional services that we can help to be that bridge to kind of connect that point. And this was a perfect example. And I think this case study highlights, from the WealthBridge perspective, where estate planning, tax mitigation, insurance and liquidity strategy, long-term wealth modeling really helped to establish that framework. From our perspective on 60C, really bringing our advice on the NPO governance, expertise, foundation structuring, charitable strategy design and organization and policy alignment, just giving them, really critiquing their ability first and foremost that they want to go down this pathway. And once they were committed to that, just ensuring that they had the best practices in mind. And validating that they were and committing to kind of carry that forward as they kind of created this. So together, we're creating that bridge. So business owners through estate planning, structured philanthropy, community impact. And the broader insight where I see this is most business owners view estate planning as risk management, right? When coordinated properly, it becomes beyond that. It becomes a legacy strategy. It becomes a philanthropic accelerator. It becomes a governance framework and a structured pathway to community impact. And that's really the core ethos of what we're trying to communicate as an added value in fulfilling those basic requirements that business owners come to us for. And what would you say as kind of the key takeaway here, and what would you position for other people who may be in a simple situation? Because this wasn't a small gift. And this is a real impact here. The value of the estate planning, coupled with the right expertise kind of advising along the way from our side, really gave a kind of strong empowerment and the confidence for someone who may, naturally would have triggered a 6-figure gift. But we're talking now a 7-figure gift, which is game-changing for foundations and charities. Right? And I think that's really what makes me very happy about this case study. And hopefully we'll be able to replicate this.
Estate planning, like I said, is very much a technical exercise. But then if you can couple that with the notion of legacy planning, you're humanizing everything at that point, right? And for us, that's a very big thing. And I always say, like, we can't ever force someone to be charitable. That's not within what we do. But if someone is charitable, we have strategies that can ultimately amplify that impact. And that's what I'll tell anybody. I'm like, hey, if you would like to be remembered a certain way by your family and the causes you care about, you ultimately want to be able to leave behind a meaningful legacy. And I always say it is, you never want to take it away from your family to give back to charities. But if we can figure out a way to be able to strip out something that will end up with the CRA so that it ends up with a charity that you ultimately care about, why not? Let us help you actually craft out that piece for you. And we would love to work in collaboration with 60C and WealthBridge. We would love to work with you.
Sounds good. Perfect. Thanks, Chen.
Thank you.